Who are the best possible recently cut players for the Ravens to sign? Who are some top trade targets? Who could the Ravens be targeting on waivers after their initial 53-man roster was released? We talk about that and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you, as always, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day, your first listen, each and every day, or free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. So video form on YouTube, you can like and subscribe to the channel. Audio form, wherever you get your shows, you can follow along, hit that subscribe button as well for 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage Monday through Friday. Plus, we also do bonus episodes after every single Ravens game, instant reactions. We do after every single piece of Ravens big news, like we did last night. The Ravens took a while to get their roster out. They about 4+ hours, but they didn't. We did an instant reaction, so be sure to check that out if you have not already for in-depth analysis on the roster. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. And again, Ravens 53-man roster, it is out. We are going to be diving into that today, but also just because the roster's out does not mean it's the finished product for the Ravens. I do expect them to make a couple of moves. I think there's a lot of potential for them to add a couple of really solid veterans. So today we're going to be diving into who some top targets could be for them in the coming days, whether it is today, tomorrow, the next day, of players they could sign, trade for, claim on waivers. Now, the way that I did research on just when these deadlines are and stuff for waivers, teams are going to have until noon today to sort through and claim guys. And then obviously I think that news will come out later today. But even if the Ravens don't claim a guy on waivers, and honestly, I don't really expect them to, we'll talk about that, there are other options for them to add guys, either vets to their practice squad, vets to their roster. They could trade for a guy. So top targets, running back, wide receiver, offensive line, a bunch of other positions we are going to be diving into as well. Plus, obviously, diving into Baltimore's roster, right? We're going to talk about it, analyze it a little bit more. We did do more of an in-depth analysis on our live show last night. So video form, audio form, you can catch it either way you want to watch or listen. But we are going to do some analysis here as well. And then just what's next for the Ravens, how we're feeling about the roster in general. I think having that conversation is really important because we can talk about, this guy got cut. They're going to come back. What guy's going to get targeted? But we also have to look at the roster that they have right now, not just from an analysis perspective, but from where do they go now? Are they good enough here? Are they good enough there? So we'll talk about all of that. Jam-packed episode today. Let's talk about it. Top free agent, top trade targets. I do have a list of some guys right here. And if you have your own, right, if I don't mention somebody, or you have a guy you feel really strongly about, be sure to put that in the comments below on YouTube. If you're watching, if you're listening, you can message me on Twitter, Instagram with a guy that you feel could be a difference maker for them. I think one guy that I really like, and I've talked about this for the past couple of days, really ever since news came out that the guy could have been, released, cut, traded, ended up getting released, was Samaje Perine, the third running back for Denver. At least I think he was their third running back. He'd be Baltimore's third running back here. And with the way this running back room shook out, for Rasheen Ali making the roster, I'd probably put Rasheen Ali on IR, and then I would sign Samaje Perine, someone who has experience. He's been a depth piece for a while, has special teams experience, good there. Third down back, I think he'd be a really solid veteran that could fill in until Keaton Mitchell comes back, and I think that it's a very low risk, low reward move where it's not like Perine's going to come in and be like, 1,000-yard back. But it's low risk in terms of I think you know what you're getting, and you don't need a guy to come in there and be your number one with Derrick Henry and obviously Justice Hill. The point of the number 3 running back is at this point probably just to take pressure off of Justice Hill playing special teams. You want a guy that can come in there and do that so Justice can stay a little bit more fresh. And I think that to me, Samaje Perine would be that guy. I also think that a guy like Hassan Haskins, who got cut by the Titans yesterday, mid-round draft pick from them a couple years ago out of Michigan. Obviously, even though Mike McDonald is in Seattle and that Michigan connection is kind of gone with Jim Harbaugh now being in Los Angeles as well, there was still some level of a connection, I bet. And obviously, the Ravens, maybe there was some level of interest in him a couple of years ago. But Brian Callahan, the Titans head coach, described Hassan Haskins as a special teams demon. And as I mentioned on the live stream last night, who's a team in the NFL that loves special teams demons? That would be the Baltimore Ravens. And I think for that, he could be a third down back for them as well. So I think the third down back is kind of the position that I'm circling here. If there's a waiver target that people are probably interested in, it probably is Frank Gore Jr. But I wouldn't really expect the Ravens because, again, to be subject to waivers, you have to have less than 4 total accrued seasons is that number, I believe. So, for a lot of these guys, you do have options. But for some of these undrafted rookies that have really good camps or draft picks, guy gets cut 3 years into his rookie deal, you're not going to have the leeway to choose where you go or your path or whatnot. You're not a vet at that point, and especially not a vested vet. So for Baltimore, I would expect them to kind of target guys with more experience than the players who are subject to waivers right now. And that's okay. I mean, that's probably the path that I would go. Now, there are a couple of other running backs as well. Zonovan Knight, who got cut by Detroit. And, other than that, there aren't really a ton. I mean, Muhammad Ibrahim was a guy a couple of years ago who got drafted. DeWayne McBride, those were 2 players that I was actually very high on in the draft a few years ago, but subject to waivers. Wouldn't think the Ravens would go after that. I mean, you could go after running back wise. You could maybe go after a guy like Salvin Ahmed from Miami, who recently got released, and there was apparently an injury there, so you don't really know what's going on. I probably wouldn't go that route. I would probably go Pirine or a couple of other potential options there, maybe like a Matt Breida. That could be a guy who was cut from San Francisco. But now that the Ravens don't have to give up anything, I think that a Pirine is much more in line. But another guy that I'm intrigued by, and again, there are teams apparently inquiring about this player, but there isn't necessarily any, the Texans want to move him, and that is John Mechie. I feel like John Mechie is super interesting. Obviously, a guy who was a first-round pick for them a couple of years ago, had to miss his rookie year with serious illness that required a lot of treatment. And I think that for me, John Mechie would be this guy that you would take. It's a flyer, but it's a guy that coming from Alabama, having that pedigree, he hasn't really done a lot in the NFL. Obviously, last year only played in a handful of games, had 16 catches, 158 yards, really didn't do everything. And again, with Mechie dealing with leukemia, it is it's tough because that put a damper on the start to his career, but thankfully he was able to get through it. And it's now for him, he had a bunch of, ACL and then hamstring issues he dealt with. So, everything that he's been going through, the health would be some level of a question with the ACL and stuff along those lines. He suffered that ACL injury, by the way, during his final year in college. So there was always some level of, is that what it's going to be in the, actually not even just final college game. But yeah, I think at that point, Mechie would be a very interesting player, but I don't think Houston wants to move him. I don't think he wants to, I don't think there's a change of scenery in his plans, but you know what? His teammate from last year, Noah Brown, that could be a very interesting player. That could be somebody who's interesting. Now, the conversation with wide receivers, I don't necessarily think that they're going to move on from any of the other guys on their roster, because we talked about this on the live show. If they didn't keep Dayton Wade, which spoiler alert, they did not, and they kept Deontay Hardy instead, are you moving on from Tylan Wallace to get a Noah Brown on the roster? Other guys who are already free agents, like a Michael Thomas or a Hunter Renfrow, do you go out there? Tim Patrick could have been an option, but he's signing with Detroit's practice squad, so that's now a no-go. I'm not going anywhere near guys like Kadarius Toney and a couple of those other players that, they were former first-rounders and they got cut, and I'm not going for the Kadarius Toney type of players here. That's not really what I feel like the Ravens should do to maximize their wide receiver group. Like Philip Dorsett, that's another guy who got cut. I'm not touching that group. I'd rather go with like a Noah Brown Allen Robinson would be like, again, it's Ravens signing a vet that is washed up at this point in his career. I'm not going with that guy either. I think Noah Brown, Michael Thomas are probably the two guys that are at the top of my list is vets. Those are the guys that I would move on from a Deontay Hardy for. I would have personally probably kept Dayton Wade over Deontay Hardy, but that's just me. That's why I don't think the Ravens are going to do anything at wide receiver. I think we can talk about the wide receivers. There's like, do you trade for a guy potentially? But I don't know. I don't necessarily think that. I think John Mechie would be a quality guy to trade for, but I don't think Houston is going to move him. There's a possibility because yes, they have Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell over there. So is there room for Mechie, who is a first-round pick, who does have talent, and I'm sure does want to play and not be essentially the fourth wide receiver? And I think wouldn't necessarily cost a lot to get. So that'd probably be my top trade guy for the wide receiver position. Noah Brown is an option. Michael Thomas is still out there, still potentially an option. And there are a few others as well, but those are probably the guys I would target there. Coming up with the second part of the show, we'll continue talking about other players, particularly on the offensive line, maybe that could be options, or even defensively for Baltimore, and also talk a bit about their roster. Stay tuned. Lots to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Gametime, and I love going to live events, really no matter what kind they are. I've had a ton of great memories, whether that's going to sports, music, comedy, theater events, and so much more that I've attended in the past. I mean, Orioles games, a bunch of concerts. There, I could list off so many different things. But Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And by the way, there is a Gametime 50% off Labor Day offer for Diamondbacks, Dodgers. Again, 50% off Labor Day offer for Diamondbacks and Dodgers, where it's exclusively on Gametime. There's limited availability and supply, and you can get your tickets while they last for the Labor Day special. But obviously on the Gametime app, Ravens, Chiefs, that game is in Kansas City. If you want to make that, if you're in Baltimore, go to Kansas City. Gametime, they have the deals for you. They have plenty of great deals over there and super deals as well, plus there are other tiers too. And the app, to me, has a ton of great features, such as Gametime Picks, which we talked about, plus all-in pricing, which you got to toggle on for that to work. That shows the total up front if you toggle it on with no surprise fees at checkout. Again, you got to have it on. Seat views, lowest price guarantee, Gametime taking coverage, and so much more. Plus, the app is super easy to use and navigate around. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime down the Gametime app. Create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. Spell LOCKEDO on NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. We're back for our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you on this midweek edition of the show. The Ravens officially announced their 53-man roster and cuts, but we are far from finished with what this Ravens roster could look like. Really appreciate everybody for being here again today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to make your second listen of the day Locked On Fantasy Football. Fantasy football experts on this network give you incredible fantasy advice, so be sure to check that out, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you are interested in doing fantasy football, we do have openings still in the Locked On Ravens fantasy leagues. I love doing those. They're free leagues, and it's a fun time. So if you want in on that, you can message me on Twitter, Instagram, and you can have a spot. We have spots open and available. But let's continue talking about some guys I forgot to mention offensively, particularly running back, wide receiver. Just thinking about it right now. Terrace Marshall, who, if you remember, there was a big debate between who was better in the draft between Terrace Marshall and Rashad Bateman. Terrace Marshall, I believe, went with the first pick in the second round, or maybe he was a late first. I can't remember exactly where he went, but Bateman went a little before him. And look, Rashad hasn't had the best start to his career, but Terrace Marshall is now gone from Carolina. And again, I was a Bateman guy over Terrace Marshall guy, and I will be victorious in my assessment with that. Isaiah Spiller, also someone I absolutely loved in the draft a couple of years ago as a running back. Los Angeles got him, and yeah, just didn't work out there. You know, Austin Eckler was there for a while. They kept giving Josh Kelly a bunch of run there. Josh Kelly was one of my least favorite running backs in the league. I didn't think he was that good, and Isaiah Spiller just couldn't get the job there. So a couple of other guys to keep in mind. Offensive line wise, I think that Matt Sharping is the guy that everybody is kind of honing in on at this point. I think that he is a versatile player, can go out there, get the job done, can play tackle, can play guard. I think he could maybe switch out with Salah or Josh Jones, who both made the Ravens roster. Sharping is somebody that I would be interested in if I were the Ravens. I think that, if you could get Samaje Perine and Max Sharping, that would be probably an A+ way to do this, just because of the fact that you get a versatile guard and you get a third down back that, again, it will be not – you're not going to be really pulling teeth with him, because Perine is somebody that I think understands his role as a veteran. Josh Sills is also intriguing. He got waived with an injury settlement by the Colts a couple of days ago, so I don't know how serious that injury is, but Sills could also be someone. I see some people mentioning Josh Ball. I've seen that from Dallas, the offensive lineman, who a lot of people were surprised Dallas cut. I'm not putting him on the Ravens' radar. He had a couple of incidents in college and has a history with the law, and we know how the Ravens feel about that. So I am ruling him out, even though he maybe would have been an option without that. He has it. So I am putting him far away from the Ravens, and I'm sure that they are too. Defensively, I mean, I'm not really targeting anybody defensively. They don't need a guy like Caleb Farley, who first-round pick, Tennessee, like incredible when he's on the field, but just has not been on the field. And the college tape spoke for itself. Titans took a risk. Absolutely did not pan out for him. I'm not, again, they have their secondary. I don't really think they can afford to do anything like that. Tanner Muse could have been somebody. The Jaguars had him, was with the Chargers. I think they like their linebackers too. Maybe they sign a couple of these guys to the practice squad, but I don't know. I feel like they like a guy like Josh Ross and all of those players as well. So I don't know. Offensive line also, a guy like Tyler Beach maybe could be an option. Andre Carter, who was a pass rusher a couple of years ago from Army, who was getting first-round buzz at a point, but ended up getting drafted later by Minnesota. He had a strong end of the preseason, but again, I think Baltimore's kind of set with their edge guys. They would have probably just wanted to keep Joe Evans if they were to add anybody else, so I'm not really going there. Then there's the backup quarterback conversation. Bailey Zappi was released. The Cleveland Browns kept all 4 quarterbacks. So if you want a Jameis Winston, if you want a Tyler Huntley, you're going to have to trade for him, and I don't think Baltimore's going to do that. Ryan Tannehill's the obvious choice for that, but with Devin Leary and Emory Jones now off the roster, there's an option for that practice squad quarterback. I don't think they're going to keep 3 on the roster now with them only having 2, but practice squad quarterback is going to be Devin Leary, going to be Emory Jones. Again, the Ravens will start to fill out their practice squads, and if you're watching this and you already know the practice squad, well, you know more than me at this point of the episode, because I do not know anything as I'm recording this. But yeah, I think that the Ravens do have options, and we're going to see a couple of additions, I would assume. Again, I don't know anything, but I would assume that's what we're going to see. I think they should. Plus, if you want to trade for a guy, as I said, you can be more aggressive with your draft picks, because you have 4 compensatory picks coming down the pipeline. You know they're going to have enough. So if you want to trade away a 6th or a 5th for a guy, you know that you're getting 4 comp picks as well. So if you're the Ravens, you don't need to have double-digit draft picks every single season. You have the option to move on from some of those picks to get more of a win-now player. But let's quickly dive into the Ravens roster. Again, I think it would be kind of weird if I didn't talk about the Ravens roster at all this episode, being it is the big news. So we talked about who the Ravens could sign to add on to the roster. Again, we talk about the roster in much more detail on our instant reaction episode, so be sure to check that one out. But we're going to do some analysis now. So 2 quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, Josh Johnson. 3 running backs, Derrick Henry, Rasheen Ali, Justice Hill, Patrick Ricard being the 1 fullback. 6 wide receivers, Deontay Hardy, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, Talon Wallace, Tez Walker. 3 tight ends, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler, Mark Andrews. 10 offensive linemen, Nick Samek, Tyler Linderbaum, Patrick McCurry, Ben Cleveland, Roger Rosengard, Salah, Andrew Voorhees, Josh Jones, Daniel Falele, Ronnie Stanley. Defense, you got 5 defensive linemen, Michael Pierce, Justin Madubuike, Broderick Washington, Brent Urban, Travis Jones. You got a bunch of linebackers here, both inside and outside. Roquan Smith, Trenton Simpson, Malik Harrison, Chris Ford, Lisa Isaac, Kyle Van Noy, David Ajabo, Tavius Robinson, and Lafe Owe. Bunch of defensive backs, corner and safety. Nate Wiggins, Jalen Armour Davis, Bo Braid, Kyle Hamilton, Brandon Stevens, TJ Tampa, Sanusi Kane, Ardarius Washington, Marcus Williams, Eddie Jackson, Marlon Humphrey, and obviously your specialists. There are no surprises here. Justin Tucker, Jordan Stout, and Nick Moore. Other players who the Ravens ended up cutting, we mentioned Dayton Wade, Joe Evans, Bump Cooper, all guys that I had on my roster. But you also got Chris Collier, Malik Cunningham, Darian Dalcour, Kadir Ismail, Emory Jones, Devin Leary, Tashawn Manning, Julian Pearl, CJ Revenell, Evandy Rigby, Josh Ross, and Pepe Williams. And then the veterans who ended up being released, Kadar Holman, John Kelly, Keith Kirkwood, Anthony Miller, Daryl Worley. Then you had DeAndre Sinnat and Josh Tupou, who were released with injury settlements. The Ravens placed Deion Jennings, Christian Matthew, Arthur Millette, Trayvon Mullen, Isaiah Washington, and Owen Wright on injured reserve, with Arthur Millette designated for return. Plus, Keaton Mitchell goes on the PUP list. So there's the speed run of the Ravens roster. But coming up in the final part of the show, we are going to be diving into the analysis on that. So we read off the roster. Generally, coming up, we're going to be talking about what it actually means, how they actually did they make mistakes, and a lot more. Stay tuned. We'll have to get to on the show. We're back. Our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Allstrecker still talking with you here. This midweek edition episode. Appreciate everybody again for sticking with me here on Locked On Ravens, making us a part of your day and your first listen each and every day as well. If you're an everydayer, you listen to me every single day, watch every single day. Really, really appreciate you and all the support. Been doing this for 5 years. So if you started with me 5 years ago, or if you have been an everydayer for just a little while now, always appreciate that support. If you're new to the channel, welcome into the show, whether you're watching or listening. Hopefully you'll stay a while. You can hit that subscribe button, hit that like button on YouTube. You can follow along in audio form. We have 5 days a week of Ravens content. Plus, if you're somewhere in the middle, welcome back to the show. Tell a friend, tell a family member. Really trying to spread the word here of Locked On Ravens to grow the communities, which have already been incredible. Audio, video, social media, subtext. So if you have a friend or a family member who wants daily Ravens coverage, 5 days a week, all day, every day, Ravens, we have them covered. So be sure to spread the word. Now, let's talk about the roster a little bit more. We just went over the initial moves, that roster in the final part of the second segment. I think for the most part, it was pretty expected, although there were a couple of moves that I probably wouldn't have made. And judging by, if you listen to my roster prediction, there were a few moves that I don't agree with that the Ravens made. First of all, I believe that Dayton Wade should have made the roster. Maybe you'll be listening back to this and we'll know what happened to Dayton Wade, but I'm recording this without that knowledge. And I don't think Dayton Wade passes through waivers. I just, you can pray and we can hope, much like we did with Ardarius. This example, I bring it up all the time. If you're an everyday, you've heard me say it before, maybe one too many times. I'm going to say it again right here just for context. Where Ardarius Washington was cut from the Ravens a couple of years ago, and everybody was like, all right, he's done. He's getting claimed on waivers. There's no way. And somehow he passed through it. And by the way, the reason apparently the Ravens waited so long to release their roster in the first place here was because apparently they feel like, their teams feel like there is a competitive advantage to being able to withhold that information. And, there's, I guess, a little bit of an increased chance that your guy doesn't get claimed on waivers. I don't necessarily buy that, but I guess that's what's going on. I'm passing on the information here. But I don't think Dayton Wade makes it through waivers, and I think that he showed a lot of juice during the preseason and during training camp. You always heard his name. You always saw him flashing on the field. And, if we're keeping 6, and again, of course, like I preach for years and years and years on this show, only keep 6, never keep 5, never keep 7. Then in my final prediction, I end up keeping 7. And then, of course, they go with what I preach. So that to me is it's interesting because I just 5, 7, it's just like it's a little too little, a little too many, but 6 is that sweet spot. But with that being the case, it didn't become like it started off as Tylan Wallace and Dayton Wade, Malik Cunningham all fighting for a spot, with all the rest of the 5 being locks. But then Tylan Wallace did his job and he made the roster, right? He earned that. So then it became a question of, well, Deontay Hardy, does he deserve the spot? He didn't really show a lot. Obviously, he's going to be used as their primary returner. Is that more important than the Ravens keeping Dayton Wade? And if Dayton Wade makes the practice squad, then it's no harm, no foul, right? If Dayton Wade makes the practice squad, you're like, okay, you kind of get the best of both worlds. But if he doesn't, and he gets claimed, then we're having a different conversation. Josh Jones also made the team as the 10th offensive lineman. I expected Baltimore to keep no less than 9. I had them keeping 9. I had Josh Jones off the roster. Josh Jones didn't show me anything in the preseason. Had one of the worst beats or miscommunications, I guess, that we saw in the entirety of the preseason. Maybe this is just a placeholder and they're going to sign a vet offensive lineman and Josh Jones will be the odd man out here or something along those lines. Maybe it'll be Saleh. I don't know what that's going to look like. But Josh Jones, to me, I feel like you could have kept a Dayton Wade over him. Could have kept maybe a Bump Cooper, who is another guy I would have most definitely tried to keep on this roster. I don't think he makes it through waivers. I don't think Joe Evans makes it through waivers. I'm surprised they didn't do any handshake deals. I am surprised they didn't do any handshake deals. Brent Urban makes the roster outright, as does Chris Board. Darrell Worley does not, but I'm assuming he's just going to go on the practice squad and be the call-up as he has done these past couple of seasons. Man, what a trooper. Darrell Worley is a trooper for doing that and going up and down, up and down, up and down over these last handful of years. But no handshake deals could have given them an opportunity to open up a couple of spots, and you have to obviously maneuver those as such, where if you're going to bring guys back, you got to create roster spots elsewhere. But I feel like the created roster spots for the Ravens, if I had to pick, I feel like Rasheen Ali might go on IR. You might move on from one of these other offensive linemen, like a Saleh, like a Josh Jones. But here's the thing. Here's the interesting part. The Ravens only used one of their two designated to return injured reserve spots. So for players like Adisa Isaac or some of these other guys who were banged up, you could have, if their injuries were serious enough, you could have put them on there outright, kept somebody else, and then worked with it that way. But either the injuries aren't serious and they're going to be able to work their way back, or they just wanted them on the roster. So there were a couple of avenues that I thought the Ravens were going to take advantage of, and they usually do, that they didn't. But that's kind of how the cookie crumbles here. So in terms of what's next for Baltimore, it's just rounding it out. Because, again, you never really expect some guys to be released. Again, I don't think anybody expected Noah Brown to be released from Houston. I thought that was pretty surprising, even though he technically would be, I guess, the number 5 guy over there. So there are always those types of guys that are out there. So I think Baltimore should try to take advantage of that, even if it's just signing a couple of them to their practice squad and trying to get them on there through waivers. I don't think they're going to necessarily have any waiver claims. They're so far down on the order that any guy that they want probably goes before them. But this is going to be a very interesting couple of days, obviously starting today and kind of going into the weekend of what happens here. Because the Ravens, again, they finalized their initial roster, but that does not mean that they are done. I don't think they are. So we will continue to dive into that. If any big Ravens moves happen, we will go live on the show talking about it. If they sign anybody of note, we'll talk about it live and get a bonus episode in on that as well. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, follow along, and be sure to subscribe in audio form as well. Tell a friend, tell a family member. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.